This is Changemakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
This week's Changemaker is Mark Thiele, the CEO of NARO, the oldest and largest industry group, which serves 3 million units, 8 million people, and comprises more than 20,000 housing and community development agencies. Mark is a respected housing leader and most recently served as interim CEO of the Houston Housing Authority. Mark has also worked extensively with small, mid-size, and rural housing agencies. He's also spent some time with us here at Quadell. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Katie. I really appreciate you having me. And I appreciate that you create a space for housers to have a voice. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. This has been a great forum for us to get out the good news of affordable housing, so to speak. But first, I want to pause here and talk about Mark. I want to talk about you because I think a lot of our listeners are going to know you associated with NARO, but I want them to also get to know you. Tell us how you got started in affordable housing. That's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, this really all got going a little over 23 years ago. Fresh out of University of Chicago, I'm a proud Maroon. What am I going to do with my life? And somehow I knew it would involve the fundamentals. When I have the opportunity to speak to our members, I often put it like this: food, clothing, and what? And I see folks reflect for a second, and then it's shelter, right? Fundamental. Our members are doing one of the most important jobs in the world. You go back 23 years ago, of course, to me, it wasn't quite that clear. This is something you grow into. So my path was Chicago Housing Authority, Houston Housing Authority, Memphis Housing Authority, and then the road home in Louisiana, which was that massive Katrina and Rita recovery work, followed by DHAP work at Harris County Housing Authority, and then in New Orleans at NAHRO, and then back for Houston Housing Authority, the sequel, for 12 years. So it's really traditional housing, disaster housing, and then a phenomenal opportunity to work at a large housing authority. At the same time, right, there's this connection with NARO that's developing. And I'm national NARO. We have 8 regions. We have a large number of state chapters. And so my connection kind of began simultaneously at the national level and at the state level. I'm super proud of my relationship and my relationships really with Texas NARO. And you begin with kind of doing committee work and move up into leadership. So what kind of happens professionally is you become more and more involved. Your view expands. You begin to see the field better. And for me, to kind of come back to some major themes: fundamental correctness of everybody deserves a safe, decent place to call home. The magnitude, you alluded to this earlier, of the challenge we've been up against and will continue to be up against. And then being enveloped in a family of passionate and expert housers. I appreciate having the opportunity to reflect upon all this.
It's great and maybe rare. I'm not sure about the total history here, but to have a houser really being at the helm of several of these national organizations, because when we go and we talk about advocacy or regulatory change or whatever the needs are, legislatively or even funding, it's great to have somebody who's walked the steps that you have and to have that perspective. And I think that having a person who's...
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I say that you had a role in that?
Oh, yeah? Explain that.
All right. Well. So, what I left out of the story was that first part of the arc was with Quadell. So straight out of University of Chicago, that CHA opportunity was based at the Chicago Housing Authority in a contract that Quadell had. Quadell legends right from the start. So, Kathy Rotendaro and Ned Sims. And that's where I met Vita Watts. It was a legend in the inspection area. So that whole early, for me, housing authority arc was, with some folks who became lifelong friends, I have tremendous respect for Quadelians, and that's where I learned to love spreadsheets, right? So one of the
Performance
things that,
tracking, right?
right, performance tracking. And while I was thinking about this, it took me back to my very first assignment, which in your collective wisdom, right, was as a housing specialist at Chicago Housing Authority and being trained by the team leaders and having the assignment of reviewing that, right? And, as part of all of that, at the time I thought, well, it's a little mixed. There's a variety of different team leaders delivering different sections of material. And it was a little bit uneven, but with reflection, just the thought of having so many first level supervisors have the opportunity to work on training actively, to develop those relationships with their team members, a thoughtful way. There's many ways to do things, all kinds of different ways, and we change our minds about what we do. A really thoughtful way to develop a connection between the junior level managers and the staff that they were working with. So I really valued that Quadel was there at the start for me.
Well, the Quadel onboarding as a housing specialist, and then now as the CEO of NARO, talk about a journey through affordable housing. I imagine you're a big advocate for mentorship or professional development in your personal and professional roles here at NARO, correct?
Oh, without question. The features of NARO, we talk about advocacy, advocating, information, professional development, lifting each other up, and connecting. And that last part, the connection, to me has always been the most important part. Ours is a big tent, and we really like each other, right? And folks make these connections that they make across a lifetime.
I've heard you speak about NARO's, the five, I think you call them the 5 pillars, what you just mentioned. Mention those again for us, because I want to break those down and kind of dive deep into each of those pillars.
Advocacy, information, professional development, lifting each other up, and then the connection part. So, within the advocacy, Tess Embry is really outstanding. And advocacy is key. We have been underfunded since before I was in the industry. One of the things I mentioned is that I got to hear the great Eugene Robinson speak in Cleveland. He of course, a Pulitzer Prize winner for the Washington Post. And he said, frankly, to housers, y'all are not only not at the table, you're not in the room. And we're in the room now. We still have some bitterness in our mouths about Build Back Better, but we have to continue to lean on our electeds and simultaneously advocate to HUD about what the right path forward is. So that can be unpacked more. But when you talk about information, there's so many things, and it's such a technical program. Our outstanding policy team has the opportunity to deliver outstanding, timely information to our members via a variety of different methodologies. We have an outstanding professional development crew. We deliver over 60 trainings, 60 specific types of training. I think last year we did like 170 different iterations of those trainings. We lift folks up via award programs. And then again, most importantly, is this connection. And that happens across the entire NARO network. We have 3 events at the national level. The regional chapters have 2 or 3 events, and then there are events at the state level. And that is where housers really make that long-term connection to this trajectory as they take on more and more responsibilities, as they better, as I like to think about it, sort of see the field and their place in it relative to moving affordable housing forward. So it's a lot.
I imagine even with HUD's upcoming program changes, HOTMA, Inspire, all the acronyms, I imagine you're doing a lot from that inform pillar right now. How is that message going with so many HUD changes coming out all at the same time?
Well, you've hit it on a tremendously important point. This is HUD fundamentally misunderstands the moment. We've been through a disaster unlike anything we've experienced in our lives, a disaster that affected everyone in the world simultaneously, and made every place, every relationship a little less comfortable or to a lot of uncomfortable, right? And we lost members of our family, right? We lost too many people during this process. They had to relearn, how to do many basic things. The grocery store wasn't safe anymore, right? Going to visit a doctor wasn't safe, and we're all on our pathways through that. But we'll be unpacking the effects of the pandemic, for the rest of our lives. And one of the things that happened during that period is housing became even more unaffordable. So our members are up against it. Related to that, and I know you know this, the job market has changed. Folks took the opportunity to switch. A lot of folks who were near retirement chose to retire, and younger generations are being more demanding and different about how they approach work. So it's tough to keep complicated or really any jobs filled. And our job in housing has long been overregulated, overly burdensome, administratively complex. And at this moment, going back to my point about HUD's piling on. So you mentioned a number of the acronyms. We were pleased that HUD has backed off of their changes on the ACC, but we continue to think that some of these other changes, Inspire, FOS, CMAP changes, HOTMA, ABABA, PNA, CNA, it's an awfully long list of additional asks of members who are pressed. The challenge is, of course, our members can do a lot, but it's equally important to do it correctly. And the balance is not correct right now.
Correct. It's like drinking out of a fire hose in some regards. And it's a group of people who were property managers trying to stay compliant and deliver quality services. And then all of a sudden they had to put on a hat of, clinic worker, social worker, healthcare worker for their properties out of their strong commitment for their residents, but yet now trying to recover to some of those operational things and then now adjust to the regulatory changes. It's been a unique dynamic at the same time where there's additional leasing, tighter markets, raising rents. Not really the Rubik's Cube of operational efficiency for the industry right now. So many people are struggling with so many regulatory changes. I'm glad that Quadell and NARO and many others are trying to disseminate some of that, but I think there is some filtering that's needed.
No question. You're exactly right, Katie.
So let's talk about another pillar, and I keep calling them pillars. Is that the correct word that you guys use at NARO?
They're the fundamental value adds.
All right, so the fundamental value adds. Let's talk about one that you mentioned, lifting members up, and you touched on it earlier, and I want to follow up here. You have what is sort of the industry, one of a couple, but it's probably one of the largest. It's like the industry's equivalent of the Grammys. You have the NARO Awards of Merit. And I love going to our clients' offices where I can see them from years past. It's like this brag wall they have of all of them up there. It's such a nice eye candy, if you will, but it represents so much hard work and innovation. Tell us what those are and how those come about.
Absolutely. Well, for an agency, there really are two signature programs, and you've mentioned one of the two. The Awards of Merit this last year in San Diego, we were able to celebrate with just under 200 agency award winners who had done something outstanding in administrative innovation, in program innovation in categories like affordable housing, community revitalization, resident and client services, and or in program design. And our members are so innovative, right? They're so thoughtful. They continue to find, despite the scarce resources we talked about, so many different ways to push the envelopes and get really cool things done. In addition to that, we do awards of excellence, right? So in DC a couple weeks ago, we were able to celebrate 20 outstanding winners in those same categories, but who really were able to do something that really pushed the limits. And one example, and I think of the cottages at Green Lake. This is out of Lawrence, Kansas, a part of a new behavioral health campus, which includes crisis recovery center, transitional group housing, and 10 units of PSH, or permanent supportive housing, for the formerly homeless. Or in Westbrook, Maine, where they developed a partnership with the University of New England to provide the kind of thing you were talking about earlier, a wellness center and a space for service-oriented activities such as pro bono oral health preventative care, digital denture services, and social work for 650 low-income residents. Or in Yakima, Washington, where they've done adapted reuse to create 41 new homes for formerly homeless veterans along a newly formed transit line, both very forward-thinking and also, trying to connect folks via transit to their community. So there's just a lot of innovation among our membership, highly focused on resident success in a lot of areas, but you certainly see a lot of work to end homelessness, to support our veterans, to support our seniors, and most importantly, to support the many children that are served through these programs.
When practitioners can hear and see these kinds of examples on a large scale, then I think that it helps them go farther and faster at creating or preserving affordable housing. And that is what is so unique and such a great niche for NARO. It's truly it's so much more than a wonderful networking benefit, so to speak, but it really empowers the pace by which affordable housing can be delivered. These groups that you've mentioned and how everybody comes together, what do you think is some of the priorities over the next year or so for NARO in this lifting up space?
I think of this connection. To me, it's trying to find different ways to encourage what you just talked about. I sometimes think about it as cutting and pasting. For me, ownership has not been the particular issue. It's the results. It's trying to find new and innovative ways to connect folks to success where it happens. One of the things I've talked to our team about is, first of all, I've made a deep commitment to being in the field. I'm going to Corpus this afternoon. I was in Missouri last week, and the week before that, I had the privilege of being in Iowa. Whenever possible, I try to find ways to visit either a local housing authority or a vendor to see them, and meet them where they're at, but also to think about different ways to connect folks as well. I've made it, important to staff, both to appear at these events. Our policy team and our legislative team does regular training. I think actually Eric is doing a training right now in Texas. He beat me down there on Inspire. And Tess usually gives Washington updates in terms of legislative. So Tess, our director of legislative affairs, and Eric, our director of policy and programs, will go and provide those trainings as best as possible. They can simultaneously collect and share successes. Another thought as we were talking about, we regularly do the best that we can to collect from members input for the many letters we write, either to Congress or to HUD, and provide both examples of successful implementations and examples of challenges that some of the ideas that are underway currently result in. So that there's really a lot of ways.
And we're going to get more into the ways, but we have to take a break. Coming up in the second part of my conversation with Mark Thiele, the CEO of NARO, Mark talks about why housers have to think beyond just the housing.
Housers do understand and are trying to address home, community, which means so much more than just the physical plant, which is obviously incredibly important.
Mark, as you know, NARO, Quadell, and CSG Advisors held our inaugural Women's Breakfast last fall. Tell us how all that came together and more about NARO's role in empowering women in the industry.
Let me start by recognizing Patricia Wells, who has just been an outstanding president. I had the opportunity earlier this year to visit her on her home turf in Oakland, which is just a ginormous housing authority. They got so much going on. And she took me around. And as she was doing that, I got to hear about what was going on with this property, what the neighbors were like, what specific successes of families that lived at the property. And this is all, stuff that she had committed to memory. And she's just kind of laying out. And I'm just drinking it all in and going, wow. She's been an incredible leader. Sunny Shaw, our president before her, has been a phenomenal, solid hand at the tiller of NARO. And during her term, I think it was the first moment ever. We had, of course, Adrian Todman's moved on to HUD, but a female CEO of NARO, a female president, Sunny Shaw, and at the time, Patricia was the senior vice president. So the three significant leaders providing outstanding, leadership and inspiration by example. And, going into, we didn't know that before, but, that tremendously challenging time that we're beginning to find our way out of, the beginning, and major course of the pandemic. So a lot of credit to those ladies. Thanks to Quadell for getting involved in our first ever women's breakfast. That was a brainchild that came from them and other women leaders, going into our first major regathering. We talked about NARO being outside. Credit to Beyonce, right? It was a great opportunity to get back together. And that room, my understanding, of course, I wasn't in it, was electric. Folks really connecting in that way that I like to think only NARO members can. Deeply steeped houser professionals finding additional connections. And NARO is mostly women members, right? And that is the trend, as we look into future leadership. So we're going to have to continue to find ways to get better and better at supporting outstanding leadership. But we have a good start and tremendous examples leading the way. So thank you for your support.
You're welcome. It was a combination of Tanya Dempsey, Nicole Graham, and Patricia Wells, Sunny Shaw, and several others that were really involved in making sure that happened. It's been an interesting evolution to allow NARO to make the microphone available, but through the growth and partnership and networking, you guys made the platform there, and it just really has just boomed from there. So I'm glad it's going to be incorporated into the fall session as well.
Can I tell you another story?
Yeah.
So Monday, Texas dates from 1893 when the store was established there, and was named for Postmaster R.P. Monday when the first post office was established in 1894. They were so determined to be one city that the West Monday merchants who had been separated by 1,000 yards from the East Monday merchants, moved that 1,000 yards over to the east to become one town in Texas. It grew to 2,270 folks in 1950. Now we're down to 1,300 people in Monday. The median income for a household in the city around $22,000. For a family, $28,000. Males, $2,000 more than females. Per capita income for the city, $11,500. 21 or 22% of the families and 29% below the poverty line, including 43.5% of those under age 18 and 17% of those age 65 or old. The City of Monday's motto is pulling together for the common good. Monday Housing Authority, led by Texas NARO President Beverly Banks, has 75 fully occupied, 100% occupied. The national rate is 94.77% units. And Beverly knows the names of all of her residents and their kids, right? And so I think it's just important, as I'm heading off to Corpus to see her, to celebrate what she calls the purples, which are our small housing authority members. That's most of them. And the challenges they're up against, often diminishing populations. We talked before about not having enough resources, and trying to figure out a way to get it done anyway. And you heard me right. I said 100% occupied. And you're just thinking about the challenge over and over again. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people at many of these housing authorities in terms of staff. How do they find a way to get it done? And she's a shining example of somebody who does. So I would be remiss if I didn't throw that in there while we're celebrating outstanding leadership at NARO. Thanks for letting me do that.
It actually makes me, I was going to ask you a question because it actually segues nicely because NARO represents so many different organizations, and you guys do represent a lot of rural organizations at the same time as very large metropolitan areas. So there are some common threads, and you've seen all of the market shifting and where people are moving and how that's impacted rents. And I think that NARO, you guys have done a great job of showing the trending, but is there something that has been so surprising to you when you look at the dynamics with really the population shifts, but really the dynamics in the rural and metropolitan areas? Is there something that you're seeing in the field that's either a common thread or a common obstacle that you guys, as you talk with your membership, that you're realizing?
Yeah. Sadly, the common threads have remained the same for quite some time. We are badly under-resourced despite increasing recognition of the immense gap in affordable housing. In terms of our programs, in public housing vouchers, there's only one available for every, 4.5 eligible families. There's not enough. And on the unit side, we're building less in the United States of starter homes and more affordable housing than we have historically. And as again, as I mentioned earlier, I think many of us could taste the potential passing of Build Back Better. And I think at the time in November of 21, that had been something like $1.75, $1.7 billion, $170 billion, $65 billion of which would have been to preserve and rebuild public housing, which has been badly under-resourced. We call for $70 billion of funding now, and that's data-based, but it's data-based at a point in time. I think the number is higher now, given escalating costs, supply chain challenges and, what's looking like a bleak short-term economic future for this country. So there's a lot to be worried about. And, members are laser focused on our funding challenges. I will say our members are tremendously resilient and, be examples like some of the examples I've shared and we've awarded, and happy to provide tons of additional examples for your listeners to access later. But they'll continue to find creative ways, but it is tougher and tougher. One other data point. So we recently did a survey of members. Something like 25% of the respondents were 30 plus years in the career. So exiting before too long, 25, 30 years, and then, 23% in their first 5 years. So I think we're at a moment where we better figure out new ways to get additional information into our newer members and our newer practitioners' heads, because, they're going to be carrying the ball shortly. And, going to a whole bunch of the topics we've raised, how do we do that better and support their success better as life becomes even more complicated? Last thought on this is, there are major thinkers saying that the new skill is, managing into disruption, which I think many of us are hoping, okay, disruption, then it's going to calm down. And others are going, it's not going to calm down. It's going to continue to be disruptive going forward.
Do you think that's the biggest issue that NARO members are facing right now, that slide between the funding, trying to secure compliance and retain talent and preserve and expand? I mean, right there, that scale seems very daunting. Would you summarize that as some of the biggest issues that the NARO members are facing?
You're exactly right, Katie. I think that the challenge is that each one of those, we could spend 20 minutes unpacking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's definitely that series of issues. We would hope, and certainly, again, Build Back Better was an example of a potential attempt to deal with the palette of challenges we face at a large level, at scale. Going back to playing small ball with it is not helpful, right? Because the challenge for housers is only getting greater. And as I mentioned, before, each one of the examples that I cited were examples where, housers were going beyond the traditional role. Let me real quickly just say this, and maybe you can help me brainstorm too. So I'm very proud to be a houser, but houser doesn't quite cut it, right? And neither does the word I've come up with, which is Homer, because housing is physical plant, right?
Mm-hmm.
What has happened is that houser professionals have gone houser plus, right? And, so, when I was talking about wellness, right? Or, additional services added, or thinking about transportation corridors and how do you build as efficiently and in as cutting edge a way as possible? You're combining a lot of things that are, again, physical plant plus. And I think housers do understand and are trying to address home, community, which means, so much more than just the physical plant, which is obviously incredibly important. It's how we get Housing America calendar winners like Urelli.
I also sit here and think of the advocacy that's still needed, because, we've talked about this Build Back Better, and I think people are still they're slowly getting over the shock and they're sobering up to that not being the reality. But what's the next platform for advocacy on how we still preserve what we have and expand what we have? And what is that advocacy initiative going to look like for NARO and for all of your members?
Yeah, I think in the short term, so we just had a successful Hill Day, and we were just back in Washington for the first time in 3 years, right? So 202, I think it was, Hill visits. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from members about those conversations resonating. So I think the first thing is NARO is committed to, and our members need to remain fully committed to assisting, to prepare for, and support member success, both in setting up critical meetings and then efficiently getting their message across when they have those meetings. And those meetings can be equally successful and often, potentially more so with staff as they are with the member. And, trying to make sure that, everyone is carrying their latest version of the NARO level regulatory and legislative agenda, and then the state level regulatory and legislative agenda, so that they can insert their state level interests and expertise. Of course, the members are going to pay the most attention to members, in their jurisdiction, right? And so we highly encourage members to catch success in action and to telegraph that to their electeds as quickly as possible and as best as possible with the right voice. So if there's outstanding resident success, we highly encourage folks to capture it right as it happens, and how news works, right? Get it into their members' hands as quickly as possible. We do also, in August, we do an advocacy campaign. In 2022, members sent out almost 35,000 letters to members of Congress. Relatedly, there were about 38 visits that we captured where congressionals visited, housing authority success story, whether, it's a groundbreaking, opening of a wellness center, et cetera, in person, back at home in the district. And, those type of things, we're trying to figure out ways to make it easier for our members to speak truth to power. That's a, forever challenge, but it's a challenge we're up to and excited about helping members deliver. In terms of what the message is for the 118th Congress, I think, we have four main, priorities that we talk about: building and preserving new and existing affordable housing units. That's really a forever message. Focusing on common sense housing and community development statutes and regulation, particularly as it, continues to mandate overly complex approaches, provide for community-oriented flexibilities. I think there's some room for, down regulating some of this, minimizing some of the regulations, thinking of simpler ways, and allowing more flexibility. And of course, we always call for a congressional order for timely appropriations. In any business, timely appropriation helps you manage better. We'll continue to, speak to that and the never-changing need for additional funding in this area, and encourage members to deliver that message directly.
I remember when Jennifer Kehoe last fall was posting all the advocacy campaign pieces of information, and it really is effective. So I am glad that you highlighted those amongst all of the other advocacy initiatives underway. We have heard your message loud and clear, and we have our marching orders as an industry, don't we?
I hope so. I hope that we continue to act in unity. Another outstanding leader in that space. You gave a correct shout out to Jennifer Ivory Matthews, formerly of the East Coast, and now over there at Home Forward in Portland, Oregon. Folks who lead by example and try to help, across a system, that's really what you're trying to do is do everything you can to support folks staying in the game, making it a priority, keeping their spirits up. Again, you don't want the chin to come down. You want folks to keep that level focus and to even increase their determination to win through in the face of tremendous challenge. And there's no question that we are staring into the face of tremendous challenge. But did you call out some of the not few outstanding leaders we have providing crystal clear example of how to get it done?
We've been talking with Mark Thiele, the CEO of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, NARO. Thank you so much, Mark, for your time. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Real treat for me, Katie. Really appreciate your time and your effort in continuing to speak loudly on behalf of housers.
Thanks for listening to Changemakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.